My name is Major Claire Donovan. I am 35 years old, and I just returned from my third deployment. This time it was Afghanistan, and like every other mission before, it felt endless. The heat, the dust, the silence that follows when body bags are zipped. War is not new to me, but each time I come back, something inside feels heavier. On this return, my gut told me something important. Don't tell anyone you are coming home. No calls, no messages, no social media posts. Nothing. I wanted to arrive quietly, without warning. After a long flight, almost 20 hours, my boots finally touched American soil again. I carried my rucksack, turned to my rifle, and caught a ride toward Brookhaven, North Carolina, where my grandfather's old house stood. The sun was setting when I arrived. It wasn't a soft, calm sunset. It was red and low, bleeding across the pine trees like a warning. I stood in front of the house, and right away, two things felt wrong. First, the porch light was off. That light was never off. My grandfather believed in keeping it on every night, saying it was a signal that someone inside cared. The second bad sign came when no one answered the door. I knocked once, twice, and again. Silence. I still had the brass key he gave me years ago, back when I was 14. I could still hear his voice telling me, "If you ever need to come home, this key will always work." With a deep breath, I used it. The lock clicked open, and I stepped into the house. The silence inside was thick. It pressed on my chest, heavy and sharp. The air didn't smell rotten or dirty. It smelled empty, like no one had lived there for too long. I called out, "Grandpa." No answer. My voice echoed down the hallway, and that echo made the emptiness even louder. I walked through the rooms, my eyes catching familiar details. The living room was neat, the blanket folded perfectly on the couch, the remote control lined up as if placed by habit. The kitchen looked untouched. The hallway felt colder than I remembered. Every step carried weight, like I was walking deeper into a truth I didn't want to face. Finally, I reached the study. That's when I saw him. My grandfather, James Arthur Donovan, lay in a hospital bed that we had set up months ago. His body looked smaller, fragile under the navy blue sheets. Machines surrounded him. The oxygen hissed softly. The monitor blinked a dull green. His hands were limp at his sides. One of his eyes was half open, like he wanted to rise but no longer had the strength. I froze. For a moment, I couldn't move at all. My chest felt tight, my stomach heavy. I had faced war zones, ambushes, even held brothers in arms as they bled out. But standing there, seeing the man who had raised me lying alone, connected to machines, was harder than any battlefield. There were no nurses in the room, no family, no one, just him and the machines and now me. I pulled a chair closer, sat beside him, and whispered, "It's me, Grandpa. Claire's home." He didn't stir. His breathing stayed the same. I reached for a tissue, wiped the corner of his mouth, adjusted his blanket, checked his foreline. Simple things anyone could have done, but no one had. And that's when I noticed something else. There were no get-well cards, no flowers, no water glass, no signs that anyone had visited him recently. My jaw tightened. I pulled out my phone. Maybe I had missed something. Maybe my parents had tried to call me. I unlocked it, but there was nothing. No messages, no missed calls. Just one fresh post on Facebook, stamped an hour ago. There they were, my parents, standing on a beach in Cancún, Mexico, cocktails in their hands, sunglasses covering their faces. The caption read, "Sunsets never get old. No regrets. Retired life. Finally free." My hand shook, not from surprise but from something sharper. This wasn't forgetfulness. This wasn't busyness. This was abandonment. My grandfather was here, fighting for every breath, while his son and daughter-in-law sipped cocktails, smiling into a camera. I turned back to the study, my eyes landing on the old safe by the desk. As a child, I used to wonder what he kept in there. Everyone assumed it held coins, maybe family documents. But only he and I knew the truth. Years ago, when I received my commission, he told me, "If anything happens to me and they don't show up, open the safe. You'll know what to do." His words echoed in my head. I dropped to my knees in front of the safe, typed in my service number, and the lock clicked open. Inside was a thick envelope. My name was written on the front in his hard, all-caps handwriting. Claire. My throat tightened. I pulled it out, opened it carefully, and felt the world shift. There was no money inside. No keys. No account numbers. Just papers. 4 sheets in total. 3 were typed on legal stock, notarized at the bottom, dated 2 years ago. The title read, "Last Will and Testament of James Arthur Donovan." The words were clean, sharp, and final. It said that if his son and daughter-in-law were not physically present within 12 hours of his incapacitation or passing, they would forfeit all inheritance. Property, savings, accounts, everything. And in that case, it would all transfer to me, his granddaughter, Major Claire Donovan, the one who showed up. One word hit me harder than the rest. Presence. He didn't write love. He didn't write loyalty. He didn't even write blood. He wrote presence. Because showing up matters more than anything else. I read that line again and again. My hands trembled, but not with fear. With recognition. He knew this would happen. He knew my parents wouldn't come. Not out of cruelty, but out of habit. Out of selfishness. They always said things like, "We've earned our peace. It's our time now." But peace doesn't mean forgetting your own father. The 4th page in the envelope was handwritten, just for me. His handwriting was shaky, but strong enough to be clear. It read, "Claire, if you are reading this, it means they failed the final test. Don't feel guilty. Don't argue. Don't negotiate. Just follow what's written. They chose the beach. You chose the bedside. That is all the court will ever need to know. P.S. The lawyer's name is Gregory Thorne. His number is taped under the drawer. He has been waiting for your call." I lowered the letter and sat there in silence. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just breathed slowly, letting the truth settle like stone inside me. Then I pulled open the desk drawer, peeled back the underside, and found the number written in fading marker. Gregory Thorne, my grandfather's lawyer. I dialed. He answered on the second ring. "Major Donovan," he said calmly, like he had expected my call. "If you're the one calling, it means the others failed. Is it time?" "It's time," I said. "Good," he replied. "I'll file the trigger clause immediately. You don't need to do anything else. You being there is proof enough." I gave him the hospital's fax number and hung up. Then I sat back in the study, the envelope on the desk, the machines humming in the next room, and waited. Waited for the storm I knew was coming. I didn't have to wait long. The storm came faster than I imagined. 10 minutes after I called Gregory, the hospital rang my mother. 15 minutes later, my phone lit up with a first ping. Then another. Then another. Missed calls stacked one after another, my parents' names flashing across the screen. At first, I let it buzz. I just stared at the wall, at the photo of my grandfather in uniform that hung above his desk. He looked straight into the camera, his eyes steady, like he was watching me even now. After 2 hours, I finally picked up my phone. The screen showed 91 missed calls. My mother, my father, their lawyer, even my younger brother. The same brother who hadn't spoken to Grandpa in over 6 months, but now he was suddenly worried. I almost laughed. Almost. That's the thing about people who think they have control. They stop checking the locks. They stop showing up. They get lazy. But the moment control slips away, when the money moves without their hand, that's when panic starts. That's when they remember they had responsibilities. That's when they start dialing. The next morning, I brewed a pot of coffee in the kitchen. The kettle was the same one my grandfather had used for decades, chipped at the handle, but still working. The cabinet door still creaked the way it always had. For a moment, it almost felt normal, like he might shuffle in wearing his old cardigan, humming while he cracked eggs into a skillet. But reality was still in the next room, with the machines humming, the oxygen whispering, the steady beeps marking every fragile breath. By 10 a.m., the missed call count passed 180. I didn't answer any of them. Instead, I met Gregory at the hospital's administrative office. He was older than I expected, maybe late 70s. He wore a crisp beige suit, but his hands looked like they had once been used to fix engines or carry heavy tools. A marine tattoo peeked out from under his cuff. He shook my hand firmly. "James was a damn good man," he said, his voice steady. "Trusted you more than anyone. That means something." We sat down at the table, and he opened his briefcase. The papers were already prepared. He explained everything slowly, clearly. My grandfather hadn't just written a will. He had prepared an entire plan. It wasn't just about property or money. It was about authority, medical decisions, legal power. He had named me executor of the estate. He had authorized me to make choices for him in case of his incapacitation. He had listed the accounts, the property, the contingencies. He even included a modest donation, $5,000, to the Brookhaven War Memorial, with the words, "For the forgotten ones who showed up anyway." I signed the necessary documents. Gregory filed them right there in the hospital office. The trigger clause was now active. My parents had already failed it. Not long after, the hospital administration received an official note. My parents had informed them that they would not be arriving. Their reason? Travel conflict and emotional distress. I almost laughed again. They had 3 full days to come back. In that time, they had posted 17 pictures from Cancún. Boat cruises, lobster dinners, spa selfies, and one caption that stung more than the rest: "Learning to finally live. No guilt, no obligations." No obligations. I returned to the room and stood by my grandfather's bed. The machines whispered on, the monitor blinked. His breathing was shallow. His hands were cold. I held one gently and whispered, "I'm here, Grandpa." I stayed. At 11:32 a.m., I signed the authorization for full hospice care. No more machines. No more tubes. Just comfort and dignity. What he deserved from the beginning. The nurse came in quietly. She removed the 4, adjusted the bed, dimmed the lights. The room grew calm. His breathing slowed, steadied. He didn't wake up, but I felt it, a sense of peace filling the space, like his body finally knew it was allowed to rest. I stayed by his side. I didn't move, didn't speak. I just held his hand and breathed with him. At 12:14 p.m., my grandfather, James Arthur Donovan, passed away. 10 seconds later, my phone vibrated again. I picked it up this time. It was my mother. Her voice came through shrill, panicked, sharp. "Claire, what did you do? What the hell did you do?" "He's gone," I said, my tone flat.
"What?"
"No, you don't get to make that decision. We're the family." "You weren't here," I said quietly. "We were in Cancún. Your father needed rest. You don't know what we've been through."
"He's gone, Mom."
"And the will has already been executed. Call your lawyer. Or call a therapist. I don't care which." There was a pause. Then her voice broke into anger. "You cold-hearted little." I ended the call. And then I turned off the phone completely. The rest of the day was silent. I stayed in the study. The envelope still sat on the desk. The photo of my grandfather in uniform stood nearby. Outside, the sun crawled slowly across the wall, as if time itself was moving carefully, respectfully. By 3 p.m., when I finally turned the phone back on, 41 more missed calls waited for me. My mother, my father, their lawyer, even cousins I hadn't spoken to in years. Everyone suddenly wanted to talk, but it was too late. The documents were already filed. The accounts were locked. The estate was secure. The house, the land, the savings, the name, all of it had changed hands. And the truth was simple. Real power doesn't need to scream. Real power doesn't need to beg. It just signs the papers, holds steady, and lets silence do the rest. They landed the next morning. I heard the sound of tires on the gravel outside before I even saw them. From the window of my grandfather's bedroom, I watched their car pull up. It wasn't a modest arrival. It was a private car, shiny and polished, luggage stacked neatly in the trunk. My father stepped out first, his jaw tight, his shoulders stiff like he still thought he was in charge. My mother followed behind him, phone pressed to her ear, already talking fast, her free hand waving in the air as if she could swat away the storm with a gesture. They didn't knock. Of course they didn't. They walked right in, like the house was still theirs, like nothing had changed. I stayed seated in the study, calm, steady. The envelope still lay on the desk, the papers spread neatly in front of me. Beside them sat a mug of black coffee and the old brass lamp that had belonged to my grandfather for decades. The photograph of him in uniform looked down on us from the wall, his expression serious, almost stern. The door opened. My mother appeared first, her eyes locking on the envelope. She didn't greet me. She didn't ask how her father was in his final moments. She just stared at the papers like they had insulted her. My father stood behind her, silent, his face red with anger. "You don't have the right," she snapped. Her voice was sharp, cutting. "You had no authority to make that call." "You had 3 days," I said. My voice stayed calm. 3 days to come home. He died alone. That's on you. "You think this is about you?" she shouted. "You think this is about your little uniform fantasy? About control?" "No," I replied. My words came slow, steady. "It's about him. About Grandpa. About showing up when it matters. Something you stopped doing a long time ago." My father finally spoke. His voice was low, gravelly. "You're making a mistake, Claire. This will be undone. I've already spoken to Michael. We'll sue." I raised an eyebrow. "Michael, your lawyer? Or Michael, your golf buddy? Because I doubt either of them can erase a notarized will, hospital records, and a video message." My mother's face went pale. "What video?" I reached into the drawer, pulled out a small USB drive, and placed it on the desk. He recorded it a year ago. For anyone who tried to contest his will. In his own words, his own choice. He said if you couldn't show your face when it mattered, then you didn't deserve his name or his estate. My father stepped forward, like he was going to grab it. I leaned back in the chair and spoke quietly. "Try it. Try reaching across this desk for something that no longer belongs to you." His hand froze midair. For a long moment, the room was silent. Then slowly he lowered it. My mother turned to him, her voice breaking with anger and fear. "We are not going to let her get away with this." "She's not getting away with anything," I said. "She stayed. You left. That's it. That's the truth." Her face twisted, almost childlike, full of rage. "He was our father. And my grandfather," I said sharply. "One of us was holding his hand when he took his last breath. One of us was checking into a spa." "You vindictive little," she started. He asked for you. I cut in. Even at the end. Still hoping you'd come. Still making excuses for you. But you didn't. Silence filled the study. My father looked away, not with shame, but with calculation. You could see it in his eyes. He was already planning his next move, already searching for another angle. They didn't cry. They didn't apologize. They didn't even sit down. They just turned and walked out of the room. The door clicked shut behind them, not loud, not dramatic. Just quiet. Entitlement leaving the building. Later that afternoon, their lawyer called me directly. His tone was polite, but heavy with pressure. Maybe we can mediate, work out a resolution, he suggested. I decline, I said simply. The next day, they filed their first motion in court. They claimed emotional duress and undue influence. Gregory chuckled when I handed him the papers. They're desperate, he said. This won't last a week. He was right. The court dismissed the motion before it even reached a hearing. No standing, the judge wrote. 2 weeks later, I received a certified letter. My parents had hired a public relations firm. They issued a statement online, claiming estrangement, abuse, manipulation. They painted themselves as victims of a controlling father and a cruel granddaughter. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Because here's the truth. Lies rot in the daylight. So, I stayed in the house. I cleaned the guest room. Donated my grandfather's clothes to the church. Sat on the old wooden bench out back, the one where he used to smoke his pipe and tell me war stories. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It felt earned. Weeks passed. My parents stopped calling directly. Instead, whispers began to spread online. Cousins, distant relatives, family friends I hadn't heard from in years. Suddenly, they all had opinions. Opinions about loyalty. Opinions about family. Opinions about legacy. I ignored them all. Instead, I focused on what mattered. The house. The study. His journals. His letters. His words. Every drawer I opened, every page I turned, reminded me that he trusted me. Not because I was perfect. Not because I wore a uniform, but because I showed up. And that, more than anything else, is what broke them. Because showing up is something they never learned how to do. The lawsuit came 3 months later. A thick envelope arrived at the front door, delivered by a courier who didn't even make eye contact. I signed for it, closed the door, and sat down at the study desk to open it. Inside were pages filled with heavy words. Undue influence. Elder coercion. Fraudulent executor. The kind of legal phrases people throw like darts, hoping one will stick. I took the stack of papers straight to Gregory. He flipped through them calmly, not even frowning. Then he chuckled, shaking his head. They don't have a case, he said. They just want noise. And they're about to get silence instead. The court date was set for mid-June. A small county courthouse, no jury, just a judge and a recorder. The morning of the hearing, I wore my uniform. Not out of show, but because it felt right. It still carried the smell of dust and hospital floors. I hadn't washed it. I didn't want to. When I walked into the courtroom, they were already there. My parents sat at the front with 2 lawyers beside them, and a third man in a suit that probably cost more than most people's cars. He smirked when he saw me, like he thought the outcome was already his. The judge entered. Everyone rose. Then the hearing began. Their lawyer went first. He spoke with grand drama, pacing slowly, raising his voice at all the right moments. Your Honor, Major Donovan may be a decorated soldier, but she manipulated her grandfather in his weakest moments. She isolated him, pressured him, and forced him to change his will. She cut his only son from his rightful inheritance. He sat down like he had just delivered a victory speech. The judge didn't even blink. Gregory stood next. He didn't pace. He didn't raise his voice. He walked to the front, pulled a flash drive from his pocket, and handed it to the clerk. No long words, Your Honor. Just facts. The screen lit up. My grandfather appeared, sitting in his recliner, a plaid blanket over his knees. His face was tired, but his eyes were sharp, clear. He leaned toward the camera. If you're watching this, it means I'm gone or close to it. So let me be plain. I wrote my will myself. Every word. Nobody told me what to say. Nobody guided my hand. My granddaughter, Major Claire Donovan, is the only one in this family who showed up when it mattered. My son is too busy golfing. His wife is too busy at the spa. They'll tell you I was confused or manipulated. But let me be clear. I've got more mental clarity than most people in Congress. And if they couldn't be here when their own father was dying, they don't deserve a dime, or even the dirt under my fingernails. He looked directly into the lens, his eyes steady, his voice firm. Claire, this is war.
But I trained you for that.
Hold the line. The video ended. Silence filled the courtroom. Real silence. The kind that weighs heavy and dares anyone to break it. The judge turned to their lawyer. Do you have anything to contradict this video? Medical records, doctor statements, anything other than theory? The lawyer shuffled papers, cleared his throat, looked at his clients. Your Honor, we believe the video is emotionally charged. The judge cut him off. That's a no. Then Gregory spoke again. I'd like to call one witness. Major Claire Donovan. I stood and walked to the stand. My hands didn't shake. My voice didn't falter. I told the truth. I described coming home quietly. The silent house. The empty rooms. The study. The machines. My grandfather's frail hand in mine. I described checking my phone, seeing my parents on a beach while he fought for breath alone. I told them about the will, the clause, the handwritten note. And then I told them about his final hours. How I sat by his side, holding his hand, as his breathing slowed. How I whispered, I'm here, Grandpa. And how he finally passed in peace. I ended with one line. I didn't ask to inherit anything. I just stayed. And they didn't. The judge nodded. Thank you, Major Donovan. No cross-examination. My parents' lawyers didn't even try. The judge left the room for 10 minutes. When he returned, he read his ruling directly into the record. This court finds no evidence of coercion or fraud. The decedent's statements are consistent, intentional, and clear. The plaintiff's absence during their father's final days speaks louder than any legal argument. Major Donovan is the lawful executor and sole beneficiary. Case dismissed with prejudice. No fanfare. No gavel slam. Just truth on paper. I stood, calm, collected. My parents didn't move. My mother finally hissed under her breath, You'll regret this. I looked at her one last time. Not with anger. Not even with pity. Just with clarity. I already regret it, I said quietly. Every birthday you missed. Every anniversary you skipped. Every time Grandpa asked me if you'd call, and I lied to protect you. Then I turned and walked out of the courtroom. I didn't look back. Back at the house, I sat on the back porch with a cup of coffee. The evening sun stretched long shadows across the yard. For the first time in months, the silence felt different. It wasn't heavy. It wasn't empty. It was mine. My parents could scream. They could hire lawyers. They could spin stories. But the truth was simple. They left. I stayed. And no courtroom in the world could change that. After the court ruling, the noise changed shape. My parents stopped calling directly, but they didn't disappear. They just shifted their strategy. A month later, I received a certified letter. Inside was a printed copy of an online article. My father had written an op-ed for some digital magazine, painting himself as a victim. The headline read, "A Estranged Son Speaks Out, A Father's Love Stolen by Greed." I sat at the kitchen table, reading his words. He claimed I had brainwashed his dying father, that I had held him emotionally hostage, that I had cut him off from his own family. He described himself as a loving son, abandoned by a manipulative granddaughter who used her uniform as a weapon. I didn't get angry. I didn't even laugh. I just folded the paper and set it aside. Because I knew what this was. It wasn't truth. It wasn't even grief. It was performance. It was theater. And theater doesn't last forever. So instead of responding, I started building something real. 6 months after Grandpa died, I founded the Donovan Foundation. Its mission was simple: to provide in-home support for aging veterans who had no one left to care for them. Nurses, transportation, grief counseling, burial honors. No questions asked. I used Grandpa's money to start it. His house became the first office. His study, the same room where I had opened his will, became a space for legal aid. Veterans could come in, sit down, and get help writing their wills for free. I kept the sign outside plain. Just a wooden board with his name carved in it. Underneath, the words he had written in his own hand years ago: honor before comfort. People came. Slowly at first, then more and more. Old Marines with shaky hands. Quiet Army medics who hadn't spoken to their families in decades. A Coast Guard veteran who showed up every Friday just to drink burnt coffee and talk about the weather. They told me their stories. Stories about families who had walked away. Wives who had passed. Children who never called. Hospital visits where no one came except a volunteer with a badge and a folded flag. One man, Harold, a 91-year-old Navy radio technician, broke down when I told him the foundation would cover his rent and send a nurse twice a week. He gripped my hand and whispered, "I thought I was done being remembered." That moment stayed with me, because that's what it was all about. Not inheritance, not lawsuits, not money, presence. The local newspaper did a story on us. The headline read, "Granddaughter Turns Betrayal into Brotherhood." They took a photo of me standing in front of the house, the carved sign in the background. The next day, my mother sent me a screenshot of the article. No words, just a single red question mark. I didn't reply, because she didn't deserve an answer. 1 year later, we held our first Memorial Day ceremony. It wasn't the big parade with flags and speeches. Ours was quiet. 37 folding chairs in the backyard. A table with name cards. One empty chair at the front with Grandpa's photo and a single bronze star on a velvet square. I stood to speak. My voice didn't shake. I told the truth about war, about absence, about presence. I said legacy isn't about what you pass down in your will. It's about who shows up when nobody's watching. I read the last words my grandfather ever wrote to me. In the end, don't fight for applause. Fight for the ones who aren't in the room to clap. When the ceremony ended, a man walked up to me. He wore full dress blues, medals pinned across his chest. His eyes were tired but proud. "I served with your cousin Michael," he said. "He told me what your family tried to do." I braced myself, expecting a lecture. But instead he smiled, slow and sure. "Damn proud of you," he said. "Takes guts to walk alone." I shook his hand, and, for the first time in a long time, I felt something lift inside me. That night, I drove out to the cemetery. Rows of headstones stretched out under a lavender sky. I found Grandpa's grave. His name carved in stone. James Arthur Donovan, U.S. Navy. Honor before comfort. I knelt, placed a hand on the cold stone, and whispered. I stayed. No music, no speeches, just silence. And in that silence, I finally understood. Some people inherit money. Some inherit property. I inherited purpose. And purpose doesn't run out. It grows. The months after the foundation started were busy, but steady. Every day, someone new walked through the front door. Some needed paperwork. Some needed food. Some just needed to talk. I kept the coffee pot running all day. The smell filled the house, mixing with the old scent of wood and dust that never really left. Veterans would sit at the same table where Grandpa once sorted his bills, and they would talk about battles long past, about friends they lost, about families that no longer called. One afternoon, a Marine named Carl sat down. He was in his 80s, with a cane and a scar across his cheek. He tapped the table and said, "You know what the hardest part is? Not the pain, not the memories. It's being forgotten." I nodded, because I understood. I had seen what being forgotten looked like. The foundation grew faster than I expected. Word spread. Churches referred people. The local VFW sent over names. Nurses called to volunteer. Even the town council donated small grants to help cover costs. Through it all, my parents stayed silent. But silence doesn't always mean peace. One evening, Gregory called. "They're preparing another move," he said. I sighed. "What now?" "They're planning another lawsuit. A bigger one. They've hired new lawyers in the city." I shook my head. "They never stop." "They won't," Gregory replied. "Not until they're forced to." And he was right. 2 months later, I was served again. This time the language was even heavier. Undue influence. Fraudulent executor. Manipulation of an elderly man. They wanted another trial. Gregory reviewed the papers with his usual calm. "This will fall apart too. But they're loud. And sometimes loud is enough to cause damage, even when it's wrong." I took a breath. "Then let them be loud. I'll be silent." The trial date was set. The morning of the hearing, I drove to the courthouse in silence. The roads were lined with trees, the sun breaking through the branches. I thought about Grandpa, about his words. Presence matters. That was all I needed to carry with me. Inside, the courtroom looked almost the same as before. My parents sat with their lawyers, stiff and cold. They avoided my eyes. Their new lawyer stood. He was younger, sharper, with a voice full of confidence. "Your Honor, we intend to prove that Major Donovan manipulated her grandfather during a time of weakness, that she isolated him, cut him off from his rightful heirs, and forced him to make decisions under pressure." He spoke for 20 minutes. Dramatic words, big gestures, the kind of speech designed for headlines. Then it was Gregory's turn. He didn't raise his voice. He simply stood, pressed play on the same video, and let Grandpa speak again. There he was. My grandfather, clear, sharp, unbroken. His voice filling the room. His words undeniable. I wrote my will myself. Every word. Nobody told me what to say. Nobody guided my hand. My granddaughter was the only one who showed up. If my son and his wife couldn't be here when it mattered, they don't deserve a thing. The judge leaned back in his chair, listening carefully. When the video ended, Gregory said, "The rest is noise, Your Honor." The judge nodded. Understood. Then it was my turn again. I took the stand. I told the truth, just as I had before. I told them about the night I came home, about the empty house, about the machines, about finding my grandfather alone, holding his hand until the end. And I told them one line that mattered most. I didn't take anything. I just stayed. And they didn't. The courtroom went silent. The judge left, then returned with his decision. This court finds no evidence of undue influence or fraud. The testimony of the decedent is clear. The absence of the plaintiffs is undeniable. Major Donovan remains the lawful executor and beneficiary. Case dismissed. It was over. Again. My parents didn't look at me. They stood, gathered their papers, and walked out. I stayed seated for a moment longer, breathing slowly, letting the weight lift. Outside, the air felt lighter. The sky looked clearer. I drove back to the house, back to the foundation, back to the work that mattered. Because in the end, courtrooms don't define legacy. Actions do. That evening, I sat on the back porch, listening to the crickets. I thought about Grandpa, about how he had seen all of this coming. He had trusted me to hold the line. And I had. After the second trial ended, the noise slowed down, but it never stopped completely. My parents were clever, in their own way. When the courts closed one door, they tried another. When the law rejected their claims, they turned to whispers, to gossip, to public opinion. I started seeing their names pop up online. They gave interviews to small blogs, podcasts that no one really listened to. They repeated the same story, that I had stolen everything, that I had manipulated a frail old man, that I was obsessed with power. They painted themselves as victims. At first, I worried it might hurt the foundation. But I underestimated people. Veterans who walked into the house didn't care about gossip. They cared about presence. They cared that someone made coffee, that someone listened, that someone remembered their names. One day, a volunteer showed me a nasty article that had been posted online. "Do you want me to respond to this?" she asked. I shook my head.
No.
Let it rot on its own. Because lies always rot. Instead of fighting back with words, I kept working. The foundation grew. We added more nurses. We bought a small van to help transport veterans to hospitals and back. We created a small grief counseling group that met every Thursday in the living room. Slowly, the silence in the house turned into something else. It became community. It became strength. But my parents weren't done. 3 months later, I received another envelope. This time it wasn't a lawsuit. It was a letter from their lawyer. They wanted to negotiate. They suggested a settlement. If I handed over half the estate, they would drop all future claims and stop the public campaign. I didn't even finish reading it. I tore the letter in half and threw it in the trash. That night, I sat at Grandpa's desk, looking at his photo. I thought about everything. About the courts. About the noise. About the silence. And I whispered, "Don't worry. I won't give them an inch." The next morning, Gregory called. "They'll keep trying, Claire. You sure you don't want to end this with a settlement?" "No," I said. "Because that's what they want. To make me tired. To push until I give in. But I won't." Gregory paused, then chuckled. James would be proud. Work at the foundation kept me busy. Veterans came and went. Some left stories behind. Some left only a handshake. Every face reminded me why I had chosen this path. One afternoon, an older man in a wheelchair came in. His jacket carried the patch of the USS Missouri. His cap was faded, but his eyes were sharp. He looked at me for a long moment and said, "You're his granddaughter." "Yes," I replied softly. "I served with him," the man said. "Korea, 1951. Toughest man I ever knew." He told me stories about Grandpa, about drills on the deck, about nights at sea, about how Grandpa once punched a lieutenant for trying to dock the ship while drunk. Got a week in the brig and a standing ovation, the man laughed. Before he left, I gave him the folded flag Grandpa had left behind. "I think he'd want you to have it," I said. The man's eyes watered. He saluted me. I saluted back. Moments like that gave me strength. Meanwhile, my parents' campaign started to weaken. People stopped listening. Their words grew stale. And no matter how much they shouted, the truth stood firm. One evening, I sat on the back porch, watching the sunset over the trees. The air was cool, the the sky painted in gold and purple. For the first time in a long time, I felt calm, because I finally understood something. They could take me to court again. They could shout into microphones. They could write articles, spread lies, even hire firms to twist the truth. But they couldn't erase presence. They weren't there. And I was. And that simple fact would outlast everything. A year after Grandpa's passing, the house no longer felt heavy. The silence that once pressed on me had turned into something else. It had become strength. It had become purpose. The Donovan Foundation was no longer just a small local project. It had become a lifeline. Veterans called us every week. Families reached out for help. Nurses volunteered more hours. The house that once held only grief now carried voices, footsteps, and stories. On Memorial Day, we held our second ceremony. It was larger than the first. More than 60 chairs filled the backyard. Flags lined the fence. Veterans in uniform sat shoulder to shoulder, some in wheelchairs, some with canes, but all with pride in their eyes. I stood at the front, Grandpa's photo on the table beside me, a bronze star glinting in the sun. I spoke simply. Legacy is not about money. Legacy is not about property. Legacy is about showing up. My grandfather taught me that. And that's what this foundation is about. Being present when it matters the most. The crowd was silent, listening. Some nodded. Some wiped their eyes. After the ceremony, people came forward one by one.
Some shook my hand.
Some hugged me. Some just said thank you. That night, I sat at Grandpa's grave. The cemetery was quiet, the sky dark with only a few stars breaking through. I placed my hand on the stone and whispered, I kept my promise. I stayed. I thought about everything that had happened. The phone calls, the lawsuits, the anger, the lies. My parents had thrown everything they had at me, but none of it mattered in the end. Because presence is louder than noise. Silence is stronger than gossip. Truth is heavier than lies. Weeks later, a letter arrived from my parents. Not through lawyers. Not through court. Just a plain envelope with shaky handwriting. Inside was a single line. We regret nothing. I folded it, placed it in the drawer, and never looked at it again. Because their words no longer had power. They had already shown me who they were. And I had already chosen who I was going to be. I kept working. More veterans came. More lives were touched. The house became a place of trust, a place of comfort. A place where forgotten people were remembered again. One evening, as I locked up, I looked at the carved sign on the wall. Honor before comfort. The same words Grandpa left behind. I smiled because I finally understood them. Honor isn't about medals. It isn't about applause. It isn't even about winning. Honor is about showing up. Being there, even when it's hard. Even when no one else is. And that's what I did. I showed up. And in the end, that was enough. Because while some people inherit money and some inherit property, I inherited something stronger. I inherited purpose. And purpose grows. It grows in silence. It grows in truth. It grows in presence. So if you ever wonder what legacy really is, don't look at the size of a bank account or the walls of a house. Look at who was there when it mattered. Look at the hands that held on. Look at the footsteps that stayed. That's where legacy lives. And that's what I'll carry for the rest of my life. And that was the story of Major Claire Donovan, a story of truth, silence, and the power of showing up when it matters most. If this story touched your heart, don't let it end here. Backhand index pointing right like this video, share it with others, and most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories that inspire, shock, and stay with you long after they end. This is Revenge Scope, and we promise to bring you more stories of honor, betrayal, and redemption. Stories that you won't find anywhere else. So stay with us, keep listening, and remember, some stories are more than just words. They are lessons for life.